recall a time in my life where I didn't know Jesus. And as I got older, I realized how important it was to not only know Jesus, but to submit to him wholeheartedly. It's never easy living in a society where you hear false teachers, witnesses proclaiming a truth that is not Jesus. 1 John 2:1-11 paints an extraordinary picture of not only just obeying the commands of Jesus, but how to love one another in the midst of obeying him. As I break down this passage, you soon realize how these false teachers that John addresses really do not fully understand what they were proclaiming in the first place. John summarizes what the false teachers were claiming to be true by justifying and making it clear what the message was really about. John breaks down this passage by stating how Jesus is our advocate, why obedience is important, and why Jesus' commandment to love one another is significant. The overall point I'd like to make very clear is, though, why submitting to Jesus wholeheartedly is important. As I read 1 John 1-11 over and over again, it challenged me. It challenged me to examine my own walk with the Lord and really ask the big question of, do I submit everything in my life to Jesus wholeheartedly? Now let's discuss this passage piece by piece and understand what John was really grasping here. Referring to verses 1 and 2, "My dear children, I write this to you so that you will not sin. But if anybody does sin, we have an advocate in the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous one. He is the atoning sacrifice for all of our sins, not only for ours, but also for the sins of the whole world." To start off, it's good to be aware that the writing is drafted and spoken in a personal way. Referencing back to verse 1, it begins by saying, "My dear children," indicating John's close and personal relationship between himself and his audience. And as I mentioned previously, there has been increasingly a amount of false teaching leading up to 1 John chapter 2. To put this into perspective, imagine if a mega famous pastor came to chapel, one that was very well known, everyone thought he was the best and very theological, and so forth. But as you're listening to the sermon, you realize, what he's saying is not the gospel, or that wasn't correct. But because he's so well known, for a second you may think, is he right? Am I wrong? I'm just a student. What do I really know? That's basically how people felt during that time period in 1 John, because they didn't know whom to believe. So John's essentially there to clear up the previous false teachings and get the minds of people straight on the teachings of Jesus. For example, in the previous verse, 1 John 1:10, it says that if we claim to have not sinned, we make him out to be a liar, and his word is not in us. So basically, at the beginning of chapter 2, John is reiterating that sin is present in the world. The NIV translates the end of verse 1 as, "We have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ. He's our Father, the righteous one. No matter how many times we have fallen short, he will be there." This passage had me ponder my own relationship with my Father and how he is the advocate in my life. And I think back to a time when I wanted to go to Indonesia by myself for a month when I was only 20 years old. This is a couple of years ago. And my dad, not even for a second, was like, "No, that's crazy. That's dumb. Don't do that. That's stupid." But he was like, "That sounds like awesome. Like if God's calling you to go there, you should go." And in fact, he was the one that even convinced my mom that I'd be totally fine. And he knew that if God had called me there, that I'd be okay. Another example is when I wanted to go back to school and wanted to be part of the ministry department. He didn't say, "Oh, that wasn't part of the plan. You're too old, etc. You're going to have debt." He was like, "Okay, well, this is how I want you to go. You should go." He knew that, again, this is where God wanted me to go. He'd be there. He'd make a way. It just shows not only the faith my dad has in me, but the faith he had in the Lord. Now, I was fortunate enough to have that advocate in my life. But I know some of you here did not have that advocacy in your life growing up. And as corny as it may sound, Jesus is our advocate. I have seen Jesus carry me through times that only he can carry me through. I have seen him be an advocate for me in times of extreme doubt and give me the utmost grace when I needed when I have failed. This is why it's so crucial to submit to Jesus wholeheartedly. Jesus is well aware of the imperfection of humanity, and John seeks to make it evident that even though we have sinned, Jesus still desires to be in a relationship with us and to be our advocate. In verse 2 it reads, He is the atoning sacrifice for our sins, not only for ours, but also for the sins of the whole world. Now this verse emphasizes how Jesus truly cares for all of humanity. This applies to believers and non-believers. John does make it clear that although Jesus is our advocate, we should not take advantage of his grace. We should not just continue to sin. We know how much more fulfilling it is to be in a relationship with him and to submit to him wholeheartedly. John is by no means saying that we have to be perfect. Rather, he is saying to live a life that glorifies God to the best of our human capability. Next, we look to verses 3 to 6 in John's writing. It reads, "We know that we have come to know him if we keep his commands. Whoever says, 'I know him,' but does not do what he commands is a liar, and the truth is not in that person. But if anyone obeys his word, love for God is truly made complete in them. This is how we know we are in him. Whoever claims to live in him must live as Jesus did." So first I'd like to emphasize the word no in verses 3 and 4. The no is not there just to be aware of the presence of Jesus, but to be in relationship with him as well. And this takes obedience on our part. Obedience is something that I've struggled with in my own life. Not with the big adventures, and when God's like, go to Australia for 6 months and do YWAM, or go to Indonesia for a month, or go back to school. Those big exciting things have never been really that intimidating to me. But when I was at YWAM doing my DTS, discipleship training school, I was challenged to be obedient in the small things, like spending time with God on a daily basis, praying for your family, being there for your family, talking to people, and so forth. It can be so easy to be obedient in the big things that God has called us to, but I challenge you to walk in obedience with the small things that he has called us to do. Along with obedience comes with the love that God has for us. The love that God has for us is made clear in verses 5 and 6. But if anyone obeys his word, love for God is truly made complete in them. This is how we know we are in him. Whoever claims to live in him must live as Jesus did. What is to be assumed here in this passage is that John is emphasizing the importance of obeying God's commands. His love will ultimately complete us. We also can't be obedient to God just through our works, but be obedient with him through a genuine and real spiritual connection. This only happens when we allow the Holy Spirit to come through us. Obedience carries out into submitting to Jesus wholeheartedly and leads us to the second half of the passage, 1 John 2, 7 through 11. The remaining 5 verses of this passage is a shifting point. John is explaining that this new commandment that the false teachers are proclaiming is merely just a command they have heard previously in John 13:34, which reads, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another." John is essentially challenging the audience to love like Jesus does. The importance of referring back to this commandment is important because it aligns back with our point of submitting to Jesus wholeheartedly. Referring to verses 7 and 8 now, we read, "Dear friends, I am now not writing you a new command, but an old one, which you have had since the beginning. This old command is the message you have heard. Yet I am writing you a new command. Its truth is seen in him and in you, because the darkness is passing and the true light is already shining." Jesus is seen as the true light, and the darkness of the world is seen as sin. It's portrayed as sin, yes. This carries on to the remaining 3 verses, 9 through 11. "Anyone who claims to be in the light but hates a brother or sister is still in darkness. Anyone who loves their brother and sister lives in light, and there is nothing in them to make them stumble. But anyone who hates a brother or sister is in darkness and walks around in the darkness. They do not know where they are going because the darkness has blinded them." John is bluntly saying here, there is no way if you are following Jesus, living in his light, that you should stumble. Well, we live in a fallen world, and there's no way we're never going to sin. John is merely just reassuring that if you're living in the light of Jesus, he can turn any mistake, circumstance, triumph, shortness, and reflect on his glory. John is also encouraging us to love one another, and as it says in verse 10, "Anyone who loves their brother and sister lives in the light." And this "love one another" phrase that he is indicating refers directly back to John 13:34, love one another. John is speaking to the audience, acknowledging the fact that as Christians, we must be aware of every influence in our lives. Specifically in verse 11, because the darkness has blinded them. At the end of that verse, has a powerful effect on how much influence sin and false teachers have on the followers of Christ. Christians, even if we are sincere, will come across sin. This is where, and I can't stress it enough, John is declaring that as followers of Christ, we must stand firm in the commandments that God has placed upon Jesus and to us, because when we submit to Jesus wholeheartedly, you are living in his light. But because we live in a broken world, there is darkness. When we don't see Jesus as our advocate, and when we don't submit to him wholeheartedly in obedience, we let darkness take over. This is where I'd like to conclude my final point by referring back to the end of verse 8. Because the darkness is passing and the true light is already shining, when darkness does pass, the light of Jesus will take over. Okay. And as I close this today, I ask you to challenge yourself and ask those questions of, do I see Jesus as my advocate? Am I obedient to God? Am I choosing the light of Jesus over the darkness of the world? Jesus truly desires to be in submission with us. Wholeheartedly, I know this to be true in my own life. Even when I walked away from Jesus, he's always been there. I often tell people, I don't know how people live without Jesus. I don't know how to do it. Because he literally is the person who completely sustains me. I hope you can walk away knowing that above all else, Jesus does love you and desires to be in wholeheartedly submission with you.